My name is Abigail Sloan, and I'm 38. For almost 10 years now, I've been living in Portland, on the 14th floor of a brick building on the banks of the Willamette River. In the morning, I wake up to the sound of boats and the sun's rays, making their way through the thick curtains, lay in narrow strips on the wooden floor of the bedroom. It's quiet here, especially at dawn, when the city is still just stretching from sleep, and I go out on the balcony with a cup of coffee, breathing in the cool northwest air. I am a marketing director at one of the largest technology companies in the region. It's a demanding job, sometimes exhausting, but I love it. I love numbers, I love strategies, I love the team. After I divorced Lance 2 years ago, it was like I came out of a long tunnel. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have to look around, adjust, or trade. Life was no longer flowing through my fingers. I exhaled and began to live, slowly, confidently, on my own terms. My apartment is paid off to the last cent. There is an amount in my savings account that gives me peace of mind, and I finally realized that I already have everything I really need. That Monday, I was looking through the quarterly reports when the phone rang. Mom popped up on the screen. I smiled automatically, the way it happens when you remember someone's kind side, which is in the past. She pressed the green button, pressed the phone to her ear, and before she even had time to say hello, she heard. Your father and I have an anniversary in 3 weeks. 40 years old. We decided to celebrate at home because Janet, can't stand restaurants. Oh, I blinked in surprise. Well, congratulations in advance. It sounds cozy. And you're treating us, she said in the same tone, as if she were saying something self-evident. I almost dropped the pen I was twirling in my fingers. There was a pause, and in it was my disbelief. What? I asked, trying not to raise my voice. You're treating us. We've already decided everything. You're making good money, Abby, you're alone, without children, your apartment is paid off. Your father and I, Drew and Jenny and the kids, Laura and her husband, we all need a break. We thought you could buy us a country house. I asked, as if the words were spoken in a foreign language. Are you serious right now? Yes, he said calmly, without a trace of doubt. You could take out a mortgage if it's inconvenient for you to pay immediately. We have already looked at several houses in the area. There is a wonderful place by the lake, an hour's drive from the city. I was silent. I didn't have the energy to argue or shout. Mom continued talking, her voice sounding familiar, almost affectionate, as if she were discussing plans for a family dinner with me, forgetting that we were talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. I put my hand on my temple and closed my eyes. We would have gathered there in the summer. Of course, you could come too. You have a lot of free time now. I didn't recognize that voice. Or, perhaps, for the first time I heard it without illusions. Mom, I said, choosing my words carefully. This is a huge sum. I can't just buy a house. There's no point in discussing this over the phone, she interrupted. If you want to talk, come tomorrow, at 6. And before I could say anything, there were short beeps. I remained sitting with the phone pressed to my ear. I felt dreary, as if I had been doused with cold water. I hung up the phone and stared at the monitor, but the numbers no longer mattered. The lines were blurring, but one thing was spinning in my head. They didn't even ask if I could. They decided for me. Again. I walked around in a daze for the rest of the day. My colleagues asked me something and brought me documents to sign, but I didn't hear them. My mind raced from one thing to the other. I thought about how many times I had helped my parents in recent years. She sent them money for communal services every month, paid for Laura's kindergarten, covered the cost of medicines for Drew's son, and paid for his insurance when he lost his job. It was all a part of me, a part of a daughter who, she thought, was just doing what she had to do. And now it's home. Not a request. Not a conversation. just a requirement. They didn't offer, they didn't ask for my opinion. They confronted me with a fact. I went into the kitchen, poured myself some water, and only then realized that my hands were shaking. There was a feeling in my chest as if concrete had been pumped in there. Not so much from the amount they wanted to spend at my expense, but from the idea itself. You owe us. You always should. I opened the window. Sounds could be heard from the street. The tram rang at the turn. Someone was laughing at the corner. The canopy was being closed in the coffee shop opposite. The city lived its own life, and I was in it, separate, adult, independent. But in an instant, one call, one phrase, one thing you treat us to, and I turned back into the one who has to please, justify, prove. Later that night, I sat on my bed in the dark and looked out the window. The sky was clear, and a thin line of fog hung over the river. I replayed the conversation over and over again, trying to find common sense in it, an excuse, a hint of a joke. But I couldn't find it. They really wanted me to buy them a house. Because I'm alone. Because I don't have any children. Because I'm their spare wallet. I remembered what my mom used to say in college. We're proud of you, Abby. The main thing is to become an independent woman. Back then, I believed that it meant freedom. Today I realize that for them, my independence is just a convenience. Like, Abby's doing fine, let her pull us all in now. I sighed, lay down, and closed my eyes, but I couldn't sleep. Only one thought was pounding in his temples. It's not just a request. This is control. And I don't want to be in this game anymore. In the morning, the sky over Portland was covered with clouds, gray, lazily floating, like my thoughts. A drizzle was drizzling outside the window, slippery and prickly. It beat against the glass as a reminder. It would have been better if you had stayed at home. But I've already made my decision. I had to go to Salem. Not for the sake of apologies, not for the sake of reconciliation. I was under no illusions. I wanted to talk. Calmly. In the eyes. Set boundaries. To be heard. The journey took just over an hour. I drove along Interstate 5 as the city dissolved into mirrors, giving way to suburban lawns, bare trees, and rolling hills with farmhouses hiding behind them. The classical radio was playing in the car, but I couldn't hear any music. I was rehearsing the conversation in my head, thinking over the phrases, imagining how I would say it impossible in such a tone so as not to offend, but also not to leave doubts. I hoped that when they heard my voice and saw my face, they would understand the absurdity of their demands. That it's all a misunderstanding. When I turned onto the street where my parents' house stood, my heart began to beat faster. I saw Drew's gray Subaru and Laura's white Honda. I slowed down. At first, I had a glimpse of hope. Maybe they just stopped by to greet their parents. But I already knew inside that they were waiting for me. An ambush. I parked at the curb, closed my eyes for a second, and took a deep breath. Then she picked up her bag, got out of the car and headed for the house. It looked the same as always, reddish siding, a dusty wreath on the door, plastic garden figurines along the path. But there was something else in the air, tension, as if the walls had absorbed discontent and expectation. Mom opened the door. Her smile was strained, fake, like a mask glued to the wrong size. "Hi, Abby," she said in a tone that lacked warmth. "Hi," I replied, not trying to fake my joy. I saw my father over her shoulder. He was sitting in his armchair with a newspaper on his lap. He didn't even get up. He just nodded slightly, as if greeting the courier, not his daughter. I entered the house, already knowing that this visit would not be easy. The kitchen smelled of fried chicken and rosemary. There were dirty plates on the table, an overturned jug of water, and several napkins. They ate without me. And no one even thought to offer anything. "Are Drew and Laura here?" I asked. "In the living room," Mom replied, heading there as if everything was happening according to a script. I followed her. My brother and sister were sitting in the room. Drew was sprawled out on the couch, legs crossed, holding a can of beer. Laura was holding the phone, her face blank. They both looked at me with the same expression, expectant and, it seems, condescending. "Hi," I nodded, trying to be polite. "Abby," Drew said, not getting up. "We thought it would be better to discuss it together right away," Mom said and pointed to the chair opposite her father. I sat up, feeling the tension building inside me. "Listen," I began, my voice steady. "I want to talk about your idea of a country house." I thought it over. It's a big purchase. It's very big. And, frankly, this is unrealistic. Silence. Just the ticking of the clock in the corner. "I'm ready to give you a present. But within reasonable limits. I can spare $25,000. It could be a new car. Or a vacation. Or something else, but not a house." The words hung in the air. Mom pressed her lips together. Laura lowered her eyes. Drew shrugged and said, "We have children. We cannot deposit large amounts. You know that. We're already at the limit." "Everyone has their own problems, Drew," I replied calmly. "I work 12 hours a day. And the fact that I haven't had children doesn't make me obligated to provide for you all." "We're not asking for the full amount," Laura interjected. "It's just that you could take out a loan if it's inconvenient right away." I looked at her in surprise. "You really don't see how much it is inappropriate?" "We'd use the house too," Mom said, crossing her arms. "You could come over for the weekend. It would be a part of your life, too. But you decided everything without me. You haven't even asked me what I want. They just confronted me with the fact." "Because you're making things difficult, Abby," her father said, speaking for the first time. "It's our anniversary. It's a gift. And you're part of the family. We were waiting for you to do something meaningful. It's significant. 25,000 is not a small thing. It's a caring gesture. But you have a different understanding. You've always been a bit of a stranger," Laura suddenly said. "Always on her own, with her career achievements and freedom. And now that it's time to get involved, you're hiding behind the numbers." Those words hurt. I felt something tremble inside, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I stood up. "If you don't see goodwill in my offer, then we have different values. I don't have to buy you a house because I chose a different path in life." I took the bag. Mom stood next to him and, looking into his eyes, said softly but clearly, "You're going to be sorry, Abby." I didn't say anything. She went outside without looking back. The cold air hit my face, refreshing, almost burning. I took a deep breath, got in the car, started the engine. My heart was dreary, but in this darkness something new was born, not determination, not anger, but a premonition of change. I realized that this conversation was not about one gift. It was a milestone. And maybe I just stepped over it. On the third day after my visit to Salem, on a very ordinary gray evening, when the city was slowly sinking into its usual everyday rhythm, I received a call from a man whom I did not expect to hear at all. The name appeared on the screen, Hannah. A great aunt. We hardly spoke, except for exchanging rare Christmas cards, but I always felt a kindred spirit in her, something calm, honest, not involved in a family play where I played the role of a generous daughter, regardless of the script. "Hi, Abby." Her voice was a little strained, but without hostility. "Are you free today? I thought maybe we could meet for coffee." I was a little surprised, but I agreed. Something in her tone told me that this wasn't just an attempt to make contact. We met at Café Verde in the city center, a cozy place with wooden tables, books and niches and the smell of fresh cinnamon in the air. I arrived 10 minutes early, ordered a cappuccino and sat by the window. People with umbrellas flashed by on the street, the wind carried wet leaves on the asphalt, and I watched steam rise in a glass. Hannah showed up without delay, wearing a long gray coat and carrying a bag over her shoulder. She looked worried. She smiled, but her eyes remained dark. "I'm sorry for being so sudden," she said as soon as she sat down. "I just couldn't help but tell you." I felt an uneasy hum begin to build up inside me. Everything about her, her voice, her posture, even the way she put her hands on the table, indicated that something unpleasant was about to happen. "I was at your parents' yesterday," she began, and then stopped. I overheard them talking in the kitchen. They didn't know I was still in the house. I leaned closer and wrapped my arms around the cup more tightly. "They were discussing the anniversary," she continued. "They postponed the holiday time by 4 hours. Not 6, as agreed. 4. And they didn't tell anyone. Or rather, everyone except you. The door will be closed. I want you to come when it's over. They want to humiliate you." I stared at her without blinking. A lump formed in my throat. The words sounded so casual, almost mundane, that my brain refused to take them in at once. I tried to grasp the details. Maybe she misunderstood. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But I could tell by the look in Hannah's eyes, no. "Everything said is true." "Are you sure?" I finally managed. "Unfortunately, yes." Your mother sounded pleased. Drew was laughing. "Laura said it would put Abigail in her place." I couldn't believe my ears. I left without saying goodbye. "I'm not going in there, Abby. I can't be a part of this." We fell silent. My heart was beating as if someone had turned on a metronome in my chest. I couldn't find the words. Not a single one. It was still raining outside, it was warm inside, it smelled like baking, and I felt like a man about to collapse the ceiling. "Thanks for telling me," I finally said. "Thank you for your honesty." "I couldn't help it," she said softly. "You don't deserve this." On the way back home, I drove like I was in a dream. The gray streets merged into a continuous ribbon, the lanterns trembled in the mirror, and there was only emptiness inside me. I remembered every look in the house, every phrase I said that evening. They knew I would refuse. They were already preparing this scene then. And I was still hoping for reconciliation. But by evening, something had changed in me. All that remained of the feeling of betrayal was dry anger, thick as a steel ball in his chest. I've allowed myself to be comfortable for too long. For too long she had silently agreed, hoping that love could be bought with care. I turned on the lamp in my office, turned on my laptop, and opened an online bank. I canceled all auto transfers, monthly payments to parents, transactions on Drew's card, payments for Laura's kindergarten. Then I opened Excel. I started this year and went back. Month after month, row after row, Christmas in Aruba, 5,300, a new box for his father's tablet, 210, Tyler's medical treatment fee, 1,700, Drew's tire service, 380. In the end, a sum came out that took my breath away. $63,427. Almost as much as the down payment for the house they wanted. I printed out the chart. Then the letter. By hand, on a cream-colored sheet from an expensive thick set donated by colleagues. "Dear family, I was planning to give you $15,000 for your anniversary. Instead, I am ending any financial support. I am attaching documents from which it is clear that I have already given you more than $63,000. That's enough. From now on, I will not finance your lifestyle. Moreover, I will not be a part of your life. This is my gift to myself. Goodbye. Abigail." I found an old gift box in the closet, silver, with a smooth lid. She lined the bottom with tissue paper, put the table and the letter, carefully closed and tied with a blue ribbon. It turned out beautifully. It was too beautiful for what lay inside. It was my farewell act. A Trojan horse wrapped in an exquisite wrapper. Not out of revenge. Not out of spite. And so that they can finally see that I am no longer their bank. I am a human being. And I'm leaving. By that evening, the sky over Salem had thickened into a heavy, almost leaden blanket. The air was cool, with the smell of dead leaves and withered grass. There was a premonition of rain in it, as if nature itself had decided to complement the theatricality of the moment. I stopped the car on the opposite side of the street from my parents' house. The time is 5:45. 25 minutes later than the hour when their celebration actually began. 25 minutes later than the staged trap that was supposed to bring me to my knees for good. I sat in the car, watching silhouettes flash by the windows, laughter, and the clink of glasses, and my heart was beating with icy regularity. I felt no fear. Pain, yes. Betrayal, yes. But fear? It burned to the ground somewhere between the request for a country house and the inscription on the door, which I read earlier in someone else's mouth than with my own eyes. I took out the box from my seat. Silver, wrapped with ribbon, neat and elegant. There was no gold or congratulations inside, just the facts, just cold paper and my letter. My goodbye. I took a deep breath, opened the car door, and walked down the path I remembered from my childhood. The house I grew up in seemed alien now. The door with peeling paint, the step that was always promised to be fixed, and the welcome mat, so mocking that evening, as if he also knew what was going on. But the main note of this scene was a sign taped to the door. It was handwritten, crookedly, as if hurriedly, but too neatly to believe in an accident. Welcome to our anniversary. Everyone is invited except Abigail. I knew I'd see her. Hannah warned me. But there is a gap between knowledge and collision. My breathing stopped, as if someone had pushed me in the stomach. It hummed soundlessly, impressively, like the last drop of poison falling from the rim of a glass. I put the box on the mat. It didn't seem like a gift, but part of a ritual, a testimony. She rang the doorbell. One short beep. Footsteps could be heard from inside, quick and muffled, as if someone had rushed to the door. But I wasn't waiting. She turned around and walked away. Shoulders tense, step steady, eyes forward. The door opened behind me, and I heard someone calling my name. But I didn't turn around. On the way back to Portland, I turned off the radio. I didn't want any sounds. I drove in silence, just the rustle of tires and steady breathing. It was empty inside, but not scary. I could feel something moving away from me with every kilometer. Not anger, not revenge. They have long since exhausted themselves. It was more like a cleansing. A slow, wordless release from the bonds that had been reaching out to me since childhood, like thin invisible threads that were being pulled to hold. When I entered the apartment, it was already dark. I took off my coat, went barefoot into the kitchen, turned on the lamp over the stove and took out a bottle of red wine that had been standing for a long time, waiting for an excuse. Today it's him. I poured a glass and went out onto the balcony. The city glowed beneath me like a universe of glass and steel. Somewhere in the distance, a train was humming, the wind was blowing in my face. There was no threat or affection in it, just indifference, which I suddenly accepted with gratitude. I leaned against the railing and took my first sip. The wine was tart, with a slight bitterness, like this morning, like a recent conversation, like my whole day. The phone vibrated on the kitchen table. I didn't go right away. I knew they'd start. They won't be able to keep quiet, ignore it. After a few minutes, I finally came over and picked it up. The screen was blinking like a fire alarm, 11 missed calls, dozens of messages. From Mom, Dad, from Drew, from Laura. I read them with detachment, as if they were addressed to someone other than me. It was a joke, Abby. We just wanted to defuse the situation. You're overreacting. We are a family. You have to be above it. Do you even know what that looks like? You're leaving us. Mom says you and Dad need money for a dentist. You could help. Laura said that their payments had been delayed. Could you temporarily pay for kindergarten again? I was sitting on a kitchen chair, with my phone in my hand, and reading. As I read, I felt not rage rising up inside, but a deep, astonished misunderstanding. They really didn't understand anything. Even now. Even after everything. Their reality has not been shaken. They still believe that it was my duty to be there for them, always, without conditions, without questions. I opened the phone settings. I blocked my mom's number. Then my father. Then Laura. Then Drew. Slowly, with the finality of a surgeon. Every touch of the screen is like a click of a lock. Once. And nothing else. Then she returned to the balcony. The wine was still warm. The air got cooler, but I didn't leave. I was looking at the lights of the city, and at some point, for the first time in many years, I felt a space inside. A real one, as wide as a field. Without walls, without shackles. The space in which I am myself. Without adjectives, without conditions, without credit obligations to relatives. I'm not an ATM anymore. I'm not a lifeline anymore. I am no longer a fortress that can be entered without knocking. I'm Abigail Sloane. A woman who has learned to speak enough. And let go. The first days after the breakup were spent in anxious silence. The phone no longer vibrated with an obsessive ringing. The email did not bring letters with requests, reproaches, manipulations. It was strange, as if the noise of a big city that you were used to had suddenly disappeared, and emptiness was ringing in your ears. I didn't know whether to enjoy this silence or to be afraid of it. She seemed unreliable, like the calm before a storm. I was still startled by the occasional call. I still found myself automatically checking my messengers, as if the habit of waiting remained inside, a reminder of the years when every new day brought someone's need, someone's request. But the storm was not long in coming. The concierge called first. In the morning, as soon as I got out of the shower, he dialed my number with a delicate tension in his voice. Miss Sloane. Your parents are here. They're in the lobby. They say they have to talk to you. They say it's urgent. I froze for a moment, holding the towel to my neck. No warnings, no messages, just an intrusion. I took a deep breath. Thank you, Miguel. Tell them that if they don't leave the building within 5 minutes, I'll call the police. And please add them to the list of unwanted guests. Of course, he replied quickly, and I felt his relief. The next day, Drew tried to break into my office. The security service stopped him at the entrance. He was shouting something, demanding a meeting, claiming it was a family matter. I later found out about this from the receptionist, who looked at me sympathetically across the counter. It's okay, I said then. He's not a part of my life anymore. On the third day, Laura was sitting in my favorite coffee shop. I noticed her before she noticed me. She looked tired, exhausted, in the coat I gave her 2 Christmases ago. I was standing on the sidewalk, looking at her through the glass, and suddenly realized how far I had already gone. It wasn't just the distance, it was a new life. And I didn't want to come back. I turned around and left without entering. They hoped that I would give in again. That the habit of saving them would overcome the boundaries that I had just begun to build. But this time I was different. Not because she became tougher, but because for the first time she learned to choose herself. I signed up for a ceramics course, something I'd been dreaming about for years, but kept putting off. Classes were held on Wednesdays in a small workshop in the south of the city. The air there always smelled of clay and something warm, childlike. No one there knew my past. There I was, just Abigail, a woman who, according to the teacher, sculpts like Bambi on ice. But I liked it. There I learned patience, allowed myself to make mistakes, did not strive for perfection, just created. In the second lesson, I met Noah. He was sitting across from me, trying to turn a piece of clay into a vase, but what he got was more like a limp candlestick. He laughed when he met my eyes. I think it was a bowl. In the beginning, he said, and I laughed. We talked afterwards. He turned out to be an architect who recently moved to Portland from San Diego. He was casually charming, knew how to laugh at himself, and, what was especially endearing, he never tried to get more out of me than I wanted to give. We started seeing each other. First, coffee after class, then walks around the city, then dinners. He didn't invade my space, he was just there, unobtrusively, delicately, truly. It was then, in the midst of this tiny island of a new life, that for the first time I said out loud what I was afraid to even think: I need help. I signed up for therapy. Rachel recommended it, my friend, the only one who didn't judge or give advice during these months, but was just there for me. My first visit to Dr. Larson took place in an office filled with light and soft shades. There was a painting of a lake with rolling hills on the wall. She met me with a calm but attentive look and invited me to sit down. "Tell me," she said. "Where would you like to start?" "I've been telling you for a long time." She seemed to be talking nonstop. About relatives. About the house. About the sign on the door. About the box of printouts. About the tens of thousands of dollars that have flowed out of my life like water through my fingers. About the guilt that was hidden in every act. About the shame. About fear. Dr. Larson listened attentively. She didn't interrupt. And then, at one point, when I was telling her how Drew tried to break into my office, she said softly, "Abigail, what you're describing is a form of financial violence." I froze. The term seemed to pierce the air. Financial violence? I repeated, as if I had tasted those words on my tongue. Yes. Violence can manifest itself not only through force or threat. It can be systemic, enveloping, masquerading as caring or kinship. In your case, this is a constant operation. You've been conditioned to think that you have to sacrifice yourself for others. And every time you tried to set boundaries, you were punished with silence, manipulation, exclusion. This is a classic dynamic. I looked at her, and something was slowly unfolding inside. It was as if a knot that had been tightened for years had begun to loosen. I wasn't crazy. She wasn't cold or selfish. I was just trying to save myself. After the session, I went outside into the drizzling rain and walked through the streets of Portland, slowly. I thought, freedom doesn't always come in a glow. Sometimes she sneaks into life quietly, cautiously. First as a whisper, then as a firm word, then as a choice. And it always has a price. In my case, the price was a refusal. Abandoning the past, my loved ones, and the role they imposed on me. But at the same time, it was the price to pay for getting back to yourself. And I was ready to pay it. A year has passed. An exact, closed cycle, measured not by a calendar, but by how slowly, almost drop by drop, my own life returned to me. One orbit around the sun, and I'm no longer the same Abigail who stood on my parents' porch with a box in her hands and a pulse in her ears. A lot has changed this year. In the city, in me, in those who once called me their rock. I didn't count the days, but they seemed to be summing up on their own. One ordinary morning, with the kettle ringing and the soft light of the window clouds, the phone rang. Hannah. Her voice was familiar and restrained, but there was more concern in it now than ever before. "I just wanted to tell you how things are going," she began after a pause. "It looks like your family is, well, let's just say they're facing reality." I listened in silence. The anticipation in his chest rippled like light ripples on smooth water. Your mom quit the store, Hannah continued. He says it's unbearable to stand on your feet for 8 hours. Dad sold his golf club membership, can you imagine? Drew moved out of his loft and into the center. Now with my family in a 2-room apartment in the suburbs. Laura got a job at the school as a teacher's assistant. I leaned back in my chair a little. The cup of coffee remained in my hand, but it no longer warmed me. Of course, no one apologized, she added ironically, but Mom once muttered that they had gone too far with the house. This, maybe even an attempt at confession. I sighed. Slow, hard. There is no victory in these words, only understanding. Not an apology, but a reflection, perhaps timid, indirect. But even that seemed like something new. Thanks for telling me, I said quietly. I'm not sure I want to do anything about it. Not yet. You don't have to, Hannah replied. That's your right. I just thought you'd want to know. After the bell rang, I went out onto the balcony. Spring in Portland was just beginning to wake up. The thin branches of the trees were covered with the first drops of greenery. The dawn mist hung on the horizon over the river. I stood up, leaning on the railing, and allowed myself to remember everything that had happened, the calls, the waiting, and the silence that came later. Most of all, the strange lightness that came that night after the breakup. That was the first time I realized that you can't live for the sake of being accepted. Noah followed me out, holding 2 glasses of wine in his hands. His smile was gentle, his eyes attentive. He handed me one of the glasses without saying a word. We settled down next to each other on an old wicker sofa covered with a plaid rug. From the height of the 14th floor, the city seemed to be a living organism, shimmering, breathing, full of movement. You've become different, he said, squeezing my hand lightly in his. But it's still you. It's just real. I was silent, not immediately finding the words. Then she turned to him, and there was unexpected confidence in her voice. It seems to me that for the first time I'm not living out of debt. Not out of fear, but out of myself. I don't think I knew who I was before, if you take away everything I did for others. Now I know. He nodded, and the silence between us was not emptiness, but agreement. That year Noah and I started living together. Not hurriedly, not with fanfare, but somehow organically. His shirts took up part of my closet, his books appeared on my shelves, his mug stood next to mine in the dryer. We didn't say big words, we didn't sign anything, but I knew that this man wasn't here for profit, not for dependence, but for me. I continued to go to ceramics, although I still couldn't do anything even. But it became unimportant. I liked being imperfect. Be a process. That made sense. I was still in therapy. Dr. Larson and I discussed not only my past, but also my future. How to learn how to build relationships without giving yourself away in pieces. How to hear your no before it becomes a scream. How to allow yourself to be whole. Sometimes Mom called from unfamiliar numbers. I didn't pick up the phone. Letters from my father arrived at the office, printed, polite, with hints of how everything could be fixed. I haven't read them. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. I knew I wasn't ready to go back yet. Maybe one day. But only if it's a new conversation, and not an attempt to continue the old game. I've had many moments of doubt this year. Nights when I was going over everything, trying to figure out if I could have done anything else. But each time there was less guilt and more understanding in this doubt. What seems like betrayal from the outside can be salvation from the inside. One evening, Noah and I were walking along the beach, and he asked, "If you could turn everything around, would you act differently?" I thought about it. Long. Then she shook her head. No. I would have chosen myself. Again. We stopped by the water, and I looked at my reflection, not blurred, not distorted, but whole. I recognized him. And that became a real starting point for me. Not revenge. Not a victory. A quiet, confident start. From the moment when I first said no, not to them, but to myself, the part that was always afraid of being uncomfortable. Now I'm not afraid. I'm just living.